Jeffrey Tate and the English Chamber Orchestra with some music inspired by, based on English folk melody by George Butterworth, The Two English Idols.
And good morning. You're listening to your local public radio station, member-supported Red River Radio, the voice of the community. I hope you're having a wonderful Thursday. Looks like it's a little overcast outside. We'll take a look at the weather here in just a little bit. But right now I want you to take a look at your listening habits to Red River Radio. How often do you tune in to listen to classical music? Or maybe you're into the morning edition local newscasts, or All Things Considered in the afternoon. Maybe it's the midday news report on an international level with the BBC World News Service. Or perhaps it's our weekend programming, whether it's the music, American Roots, or evening music with Bill Beckett and the Caravan. If you tune in once a week, twice a week, several times a week, and yet you're not a member, a contributor to Red River Radio, what are you waiting for? Give us a call, won't you? 800-552-8502. That's the number to call. We got some great volunteers standing by to take your call. And by the way, speaking of volunteers, I just want to acknowledge one of our student volunteers from Alpha Epsilon Delta, young lady named Vishwa. She's a student volunteer, and by the way, congrats to her. She was recently accepted to LSU Med School. So I joke, isn't that great?
Yeah.
I told her, I said, well, congratulations. I hope I never have to see you.
Exactly.
But anyway, now she's just an example of one of the many students that we have that come in and help us out from time to time. So again, Alpha Epsilon Delta, she's doing you guys proud, and we do appreciate her, as well as our other volunteers in the phone bank as well. Jesse Gilmore is in the studio with me, and Jesse's a longtime supporter and volunteer here during Pledge Drive. Jesse, we really appreciate you coming here and taking time out of your busy day. For those of you who don't know Jesse, he's one of those guys that kind of works behind the scenes in the medical community. He raises funds for the LSU Health Sciences Foundation in Shreveport, and as you know, there's been some major changes over there this past week, beginning the first of this month, and I hope I always say this right. I feel like I'm butchering the name. It's Ochsner.
I just go Ochsner. Like it's a German. I'm not sure. And again, they're based out of New Orleans, so who knows how it's pronounced? Really.
Yeah, really. Well, we're up north. We say things a little differently. But tell us a little bit about some of the good news of things that you've been hearing about and experiencing firsthand as a result of all this.
Yeah, I've been working in the medical community here just about four years now. And obviously, we privatized the teaching hospital that's been attached to the LSU Health Science Center about 6 years ago. And that's been a contentious situation. That's growing pains. You go from a public-run hospital, really an academically run hospital, to a private entity that's attached quite literally at the hip. There were problems with that. It was some hiccups. And I want to thank profusely the folks at BRF and University Health. They had a tough job to do. They did right by those thousands of employees. That's not said enough. But we're fortunate now, and this was just announced after about a year of negotiations, that Ochsner will be partnering with LSU to manage our charity hospital, over on Kings Highway. And why that's a big deal? Running indigent care safety net hospitals across the country is insanely hard. From a budgetary standpoint, to having the number of clinical hours available from physicians, to dealing with a diverse and ever-changing population of patients, we feel Ochsner has the know-how and the deep pockets to make this work up here. And we're thrilled that they're interested in the research that we do, and they want to support the research we do. And really, they want it to bring health care to a population that desperately needs it. Mm-hmm. And that's what we have in North Louisiana. So from what I do in fundraising, this is the best thing that I've seen in the 4 years I've been here, and that uncertainty doesn't help people want to leave a legacy.
Right.
And this is now certainty that we've never had really as long as I've been here. Couple that with the developments in the legislature this past June, where we have stable funding for the next 7 years. We hit some rocky patches in the past few years. This is so positive.
It is.
One of the best things to happen in Shreveport since the Haynesville Shale.
Well, and that's quite a comment, because when you think about all the news that was always coming out of our medical community was, will the medical school still remain here?
Yes, it will.
And that's a shot in the arm right there. And people who don't follow the stories with regards to, the medical school and university health and all that, I mean, a lot of people say, well, that doesn't affect me. That's a safety net hospital. I got to tell you, it really, really makes an impact, whether you realize it or not. It reaches throughout all of our lives as far as healthcare is concerned, attracting quality providers of healthcare to our area. You don't realize what it means to have this type of organization in our community, and we are lucky to have it. And I'm glad to hear that it's good news. And I understand that Ochsner is planning to almost immediately invest in this, and make some positive changes. They're a big outfit in Louisiana down south, and they, as you said during the break or before the break, they know how the game works. They know how to make things happen, and they're good at what they do. And so together with the existing resources we have, this has got to be good for everyone.
It is. And just to kind of bring it all back from a community standpoint, and Red River Radio is part of this community. The medical school is part of this community. There are some odd 200,000 people around here. We have a medical school. We have nonprofits working around the clock to make this place better. We've got a radio station, and you're reporting out there that's reporting on this good news. I think that all these things are part of a fabric of Shreveport. And having a stable, well-funded medical school that's producing new doctors every single year that are likely to practice here too, which is just as important.
Exactly.
And then having a radio station like this that can report on that news is super important.
Well, and again, thanks for those nice comments. And we do our best, and we're able to do these things because of listeners who help us do what we do. And if you've been listening to Jesse and I discuss this for the past few minutes, then it should be clear to you that this is, we are something of a community service in our own right. And our goal is to bear witness, is to, reveal information about what's happening in our communities, and by that is how we use the tagline, if you will, the voice of the community.
Love that.
We cover local issues in our three-state region, Southwest Arkansas, North and Central Louisiana, and East Texas, and it's all because of listeners like you who value this type of programming and information. I mean, it's not just all about classical music or blues music or jazz programs or entertainment programs. There's a solid news component to Red River Radio through Morning Edition News in the mornings, All Things Considered in the afternoon, and the BBC World Service. And if you tune in on a daily basis and yet you're not a member, why not become one of the vital few? You've heard about the Pareto principle of 80-20.
Yes.
It's estimated maybe that 80% of the results come from 20% of the effort, and you can be one of the vital few right now by calling and making a contribution. So won't you do that? 1-800-552-8502. Again, the number 800-552-8502, or you can go online to redriverradio.org, click Donate at the top of the home page, and fill out the form. Either way is a simple way for you to become a member and to show your support to your local public radio station, Red River Radio, the voice of the community. We appreciate you listening today. We hope you have a great day, and as you're listening, please consider supporting your local public radio station. Thanks.
recording made in 1960 with the great Russian-born, later American citizen, violinist Nathan Milstein with the Philharmonia Orchestra conducted by Anatoly Fistulari. We heard Johannes Brahms' D major violin concerto.
And you are listening to member-supported Red River Radio. Good afternoon. I'm Chuck Smith along with Jesse Gilmore. We're rounding out the hour into the noontime moments here to remind you that you're listening to your local public radio station, member-supported Red River Radio, the voice of the community. And if you tune in every day to listen to classical music at this hour, you have to appreciate the fact that it is commercial-free, uninterrupted except for our occasional pledge drives. And the only way we can get to many of our listeners to remind them that we are commercial-free is through our pledge drive. So if you are a long-time listener but you haven't yet made a contribution in support of your local public radio station, now is a great time to do that. Give us a call, please, at 800-552-8502. Whatever amount you care to spare, it's not important the amount, but what is important is that you do call in and make a contribution, because it takes all of us to make this happen. Many hands make light work. Right now we are a little over $21,000. We're at $21,095. And Jesse, don't we have someone we need to say thank you to?
I do. I'd love to thank Alan Dion from here in Shreveport. Alan says he loves Mountain Stage and all the music selections. Great informative news programming as well. So, Alan, thank you so much.
Thanks, Alan. We appreciate it. And maybe some of Alan's friends can take his lead and follow him and support their local public radio station. So how about it? If you're sitting at a desk, you can go online and do it real quick. Go to redriverradio.org, click on the donate button near the top of the page and fill out the form. I want to remind you, by the way, we are going to have a drawing for a $300 gift card to the Louisiana Boardwalk this Friday at 7 p.m. Everyone who calls in or goes online and makes a contribution, your name will be entered into that drawing. So please don't delay and do that. And maybe if you don't win on Friday, well, we got several other things. On Wednesday, we draw for a Mattress Plus special pure latex queen size mattress, and those are just an example of some of the many things we do. But of course, the gift that you'll be giving yourself and your friends and neighbors in the community is the gift of public radio by doing your part and calling in and making a contribution. Again, the number 800-552-8502. Jesse, I know that we're about to say goodbye to you, but before we do, any parting thoughts about supporting Red River Radio?
Please do it. I'm always, it's a thrill to be on here every time. Public radio is something near and dear to my heart. I don't even know what other radio stations are in this town. I think my dial is permanently glued to Red River Radio. I even have like the skill set up on my Amazon Echo where I can just say play Red River Radio and I get it live in my living room. So it's been my pleasure to be here, and I really encourage you folks, if you haven't done it yet or you don't remember the last time you became a member, call in today, please.
Thank you, Jesse, so much. We appreciate it. And I need to remind everyone, you're listening to Red River Radio. This is 89.9 FM KDAQ Shreveport, Bossier City, 90.7 KLSA Alexandria Pineville, 90.9 KBSA El Dorado Magnolia, and 88.9 KLEN Lufkin Nacogdoches.
BBC News with Sue Montgomery. The United States has indicted 7 Russian intelligence agents as part of a coordinated effort with Britain and the Netherlands to crack down on alleged Russian cyber attacks around the world. U.S. officials said the men had plotted to hack a variety of targets, including anti-doping agencies and sports federations. John Demers is a senior U.S. national security official.
This indictment alleges a conspiracy to use computer hacking to obtain personal health information about athletes and others in the files of anti-doping agencies and sporting federations in multiple countries. All of this was done to undermine those organizations' efforts to ensure the integrity of the Olympic and other games.
4 of those indicted were earlier named in a joint British and Dutch military intelligence operation against Russian agents accused of trying to hack into computers at the International Chemical Weapons Watchdog. Russia has called the allegations a rich fantasy. Leading U.S. Democrats who've been reading the FBI's report into allegations of sexual misconduct against President Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, have been highly critical of its findings. Dianne Feinstein, the top Democrat in the Senate Judiciary Committee, accused the White House of tying the FBI's hands so it was unable to do its job. But the Republican Majority Leader, Senator Mitch McConnell, said the latest FBI background check found no evidence to prove any of the sexual assault allegations levelled against Judge Kavanaugh.
The fact is that none of the allegations have been corroborated by the 7th FBI investigation. Not in the new FBI investigation, not anywhere. So none of these last-minute allegations have been corroborated.
Almost 200 people, including more than 40 women, have gone on trial in northern Mozambique, accused of being involved in incidents which have been blamed on Islamist militants. Here's Will Ross.
A tent was set up as a makeshift courtroom inside the prison in the Mozambican town of Pemba. There, 189 suspects, including more than 40 women, were accused of belonging to a jihadist group which started attacking police stations a year ago and since then has killed more than 200 people. Further up the East African coast, the militant group Al-Shabaab has been under pressure in Somalia, Kenya and Tanzania. Some of its fighters have fled south and are reported to have reached out to build relationships with jihadists in the largely Muslim north of Mozambique.
At least 21 people have been shot dead during 2 attacks in central Nigeria's Plateau state. Several gunmen opened fire on a small crowd in the town of Barkin-Ladi on Wednesday night. In a second incident, suspected cattle herders killed at least 14 people in Riyom. BBC News.
And good afternoon. You're listening to your local public radio station, member-supported Red River Radio. I'm Chuck Smith. Hope you're having a wonderful day today. It looks like it's going to be a sunny day, and maybe no rain is in the forecast. I'll have to update that here in a little bit. But before we get further along, I just want to remind you we are on our pledge drive. It's our fall pledge drive. This is our 4th day. We are at $21,095, and so please consider the value of public radio and what it means to you to have the BBC World News service available in your community. Call 1-800-552-8502 and make a contribution. In the studio with me this afternoon, we have a new volunteer, if you will, to Red River Radio. It's Dr. Alexandria Mikabridzia.
Very good.
And you teach European history here at LSUS.
That's right. Hello, everyone. This is an exciting moment for me. First time here on the pledge drive, and I look forward to receiving the pledges and thanking people.
That's right. And you also have, you put on these special presentations from time to time that are open to the public, that they can come and learn about history. And you did one recently about hygiene in
First Presbyterian Church, that's
yeah.
right. I'm the curator of the Noel collection here in town, which is one of the largest collections of antiquarian books in North America. So anyone who is interested in old books and history is welcome to visit the Noel collection, which is on campus of LSUS.
Well, that's wonderful. We'll talk more about some of the things that you're involved with that people might not be aware of that would find interesting. And, you know, I was just reading about some of the things that you've done, and you're a great resource when it comes to historic, I hate to use the word trivia, but, you know, interesting things to learn about things that you don't think about. So we'll get more into the details there later on. But right now, I just want to remind everyone that we do need you to call. It's a pretty quiet time right now. Our phones are not ringing. So won't you give us a call, please, at 800-552-8502 and pledge your support to your local public radio station, Red River Radio, the voice of the community. We appreciate you listening, and of course, thank you so much for your support.
It's morning in Geneva, in Switzerland, and 17-year-old Nicola is walking towards one of the most intimidating buildings she's ever seen. She's got butterflies in her stomach. She's never done anything like this before. She walks up an avenue lined with flags, and there it is, the United Nations. And here she is, about to enter it, a child labourer from Peru. Nicola started working on the streets aged 8. She would scavenge for paper and plastic bottles and sell them to recycling plants, and she'd sell flags with her aunt at her local market. She's worked like this ever since she can remember, And now, along with other child labourers, she's bringing a message to the UN. Let us work. In an interview with us afterwards, she explained why.
Cuando supe que era una niña trabajadora, me sentí muy orgullosa y muy digna, porque supe que...
When I first realised I was a working girl, I felt very proud, she told us. Most people who see a child working think they've been exploited. But it's not always like that, she says.
Lo daba a mis padres. Ellos me brindan comida, estudios,
I would give the money to my parents and they would give me food, clothes, everything. It was my contribution to my family. It's inhumane to stop us working. She's one of thousands of children who've joined movements all over the world, demanding the right to work, challenging the ban on child labour. And they're not the only ones. Campaigners and researchers are also questioning whether the ban is working. It's a view you don't hear much. In fact, in making this programme, we spoke to people from some of the world's most respected NGOs who criticised the ban in private, but not in public. So this week, we're wading into a controversial debate, asking, is it time to rethink the ban on child labour?
Part 1. Lifting the Burden.
I had the chance to do some traveling in college, and I think was exposed to children shining shoes, selling newspapers in the streets. And it wasn't until I continued my studies that it really dawned on me that what I was witnessing was child labor.
That's Benjamin Smith, Senior Officer for Child Labour at the ILO, the International Labour Organization that's part of the UN. It's the driving force behind the international ban on child labour, which it defines as
work that jeopardizes children's development and future.
And there are two parts to this. One which bans what's known as the worst forms of child labour.
Slavery, use of children in prostitution and pornography, the use of children in illicit activities like drug trafficking, and then hazardous work that jeopardizes the health and safety or morals of children.
That's the uncontroversial part of the ban, and almost 200 countries have signed up to it. What's debated is the age at which children should be allowed to do work that isn't considered hazardous. Most governments have agreed to set the minimum age at 15 or 14 for some developing countries.
So children can enjoy their right to go to school until that minimum age for work, and then if they choose to carry on with their education, great. They also have the option to work, but work below that age, our evidence shows, inevitably interferes with children's education and really jeopardizes their future prospects, in fact.
And that's the main argument for the ban. Benjamin Smith says that by making child labour unlawful, you make it more likely a child will go to school than work. And the ban isn't just about paid work, it's about household chores too. If a child is fetching water or firewood for her family for hours on end and that's stopping her going to school, well, that's child labour too. But we know that there are millions of children around the world who do work well below the ages of 13 and 14. Some of them are forced to do it, but many of them, like Nicola, who you heard from at the start of this programme, choose to do it to support their families. So why shouldn't they have that choice?
I think that is placing the burden on children themselves in places like Uganda, where HIV-induced child labor is pretty widespread, and they're orphans and they're obliged to work. Legalizing that work is not the solution. What needs to be done is that the government puts in place social protection measures so that those children can get the help that they need.
And that's the strategy the ILO has gone for. Banning child labour while pushing governments to support families so children don't have to work. So has the strategy worked?
Well, the global numbers are moving in the right direction. From 2000 until 2016, we've seen a 38% decline in child labor globally. There were 152 million child laborers in 2016.
I suppose another way to look at this would be to say that here we are 50 years on from the ban, and yet 152 million children are still in child labour. So do you think it's worth rethinking it?
I think that although we have seen a dramatic decline, it's not fast enough. I don't think we need to go back and consider revising definitions. What's needed is more resources, more political will, and a smart mix of policies that can get the job done.
In other words, keep going, stick to the ban, and with more money and buy-in from governments, we'll get there. But there are some who disagree. They say it's time for a radical rethink.
Part 2. Why work can work.
I've worked across many countries, Peru, Egypt, Bangladesh, Somaliland, many other places. I've worked with children on the streets, children in farm and factory work, and children who are in refugee camps.
That's Professor Jo Boyden from the Department of International Development at Oxford University. She's been researching child labour for decades. She was in Bangladesh 25 years ago when it emerged that children there were working in factories, making clothes for the American retailer Walmart. A US Senator, Tom Harkin, proposed a bill banning imports of any products made by children. It got buy-in from the highest levels, including then-President Bill Clinton.
Today we are embarking on a new partnership. I hope that it will become a vital part of the battle against sweatshops here in the United States and against abusive working conditions, and particularly child labor, everywhere in the world.
And when the Garment Manufacturers Association in Bangladesh heard of this ban, they immediately threw the children out of their work. And something like 50 to 60,000 children were made redundant overnight.
50 to 60,000?
Yes, it was a very large number.
Jo Boyden went to some of the factories and interviewed the children who worked there, mostly young girls. And then she carried out a study, following what happened to the girls next.
Basically, the rationale behind Senator Harkin's bill was that by banning children's work, they would then be going to school. And the follow-up study that was done with a subsample of the children, it didn't find a single child that was able to attend school. Many of them ended up in much more dangerous alternative occupations.
Such as?
Some had gone into prostitution, working on the streets, brick chipping, which is a really dangerous occupation. And these alternative occupations were really more hazardous than in the garment sector.
She's not saying these factories were perfect, far from it. Days were long and pay was low, but the girls worked together. Now they were on their own.
At least in the garment sector, there was the potential to work with employers to improve conditions. Even, for example, schooling within the context of the factories.
By pushing for a total ban, they lost the chance to improve the working lives of those children. That's one of the reasons she wants a rethink. But there's something else too. Something she discovered through a research project she's been working on for 16 years, involving 12,000 children in Ethiopia, India, Peru and Vietnam. Through interviews and surveys, she says they discovered that many of them combine work with education, using the money from their jobs to pay for school books and uniforms. And what surprised her is how some of these children talk about their work. They don't all see it as a burden. Some take pride in it.
We've got lots of transcripts of interviews with parents and children alike. Children are growing in their sense of responsibility. So there are lots of life skills that you can't teach in schools. And what I see with children in poor countries who are working is a very gradual entry into work. They've already got a lot of the skills needed. They already know how to manage money. They know how to sell stuff and so on. In contrast, when you look at young people growing up in rich countries, they leave school age 18 and they have absolutely zero life skills. In many cases, they can't even change a light bulb.
They may not be able to change a light bulb, but by staying in education longer, Their earning prospects will probably be higher. Children who combine school with work might find it easier to get that first job. But if they've missed huge chunks of their education, surely that's damaging in the long run.
Yes, I would agree with that. But a lot of organisations romanticize education as if it was all positive and good. Many of these young people are accessing very low quality schools, very low quality education. Many of them repeat grades frequently. Many of them fail to do their exams.
But isn't the answer there to improve education, not to make it easier or not to be more lax when it comes to children in work?
I think you do both. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. You just can't ban work overnight while families are still in poverty. It's the poorest children who work, and it's the poorest families whose incomes are most fragile.
So should we rethink the ban on child labour? Joe Boyden says yes. In countries where there's little support for poor families, the ban has pushed children into more dangerous jobs. And for many children, the money they get from working is the only way they can go to school. But when they look back on their childhoods, a childhood dominated by work, some feel they've been cheated.
Part 3. Following the Harvest.
I can't remember the first time I was in the fields.
It was that young?
It was that young.
That's Zulema Lopez. She grew up in the US and started working with her family, picking crops at the age of 7. The toughest work was harvesting cucumbers, she says. They had to work all day in a 35-degree heat.
We wake up early around 5 o'clock in the morning because we want to beat sunrise. We want to get as many hours as we can without the sun shining on us.
And would you have many breaks?
Breaks, we took breaks whenever we wanted, but the more breaks you took, the less money you made, the less contributions you brought to the family.
The days were long too, sometimes up to 15 hours. And it was tough work, particularly for a 7-year-old.
I remember rocks hurting my knees when I was bent over trying to, work in the cucumber. I remember scratches on my legs when I worked in Texas under some crazy heat. The coldness, harvesting apples.
And was there a time of year when you wouldn't work?
I know there was consistent work the entire time.
Work that didn't leave much room for school. When the family needed more money, she'd take more time off school so she could earn more. And when the family moved to follow the crops, she'd move with them. One year she changed school 4 times and she did badly in her exams. But through it all, she thought this was normal. It wasn't until a filmmaker made a documentary about her that she realized she was different from other kids.
And to see a room filled with about 1,500 people and they're all looking at your story, it was mind-boggling. It was crazy that I was bringing awareness to something that I didn't even know was a problem. And then that's when I realized that it was a problem and that the way I was living was not the way everyone lived.
That was the first time she heard the term child labourer, and she realised it described her. That was 7 years ago. Now she has made it to university, where she's an activist on child labour, campaigning in support of the ban.
I definitely feel like children shouldn't be able to work until the ages at least of 16. I think this is dangerous for the safety of these children and their education. And I know there's a lot of people like me out there.
Some people say, well, surely it's all right if someone goes to school and just does a couple of hours in the evenings or perhaps a couple of hours at the weekend to help give them income. Wouldn't that be all right?
It's definitely debatable. I know these families want their children to work to bring some income in, but they're just hindering their education. And I think that these families also need to find a different way to get around their situation.
Do you think you would have been able to go to school if you and your siblings hadn't worked?
Oh, absolutely. My 2 younger sisters still live at home. They've never felt like they've had to go out in the field to work. And that's because, my family moved on to a different type of job that provided more for us.
So it sounds like you're saying it's almost as though you need to protect these children from bad choices they might make for the best reasons.
Right. I feel like these children shouldn't feel obligated. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. When Zulema was little, she felt she had to work. She felt responsible, even at the age of 7. And so she says more should be done to lift that responsibility off the shoulders of children like her and onto their parents to find another way. The ban helps do that. That's her argument. But for some of the poorest families in the world, there is no other way. What then?
Part 4. Work we can and cannot do.
In India, we have been able to actually create villages which have been child labor free by addressing all of the issues in a very comprehensive manner. It is possible to create communities where exploitative labor of children simply goes away.
That's Kavita Ratner. She's been working on child labour issues in India for the past 30 years, and she's now Director of Advocacy and Fundraising at Concerned for Working Children. That's a charity that works in Bangalore, a charity that says the ban on child labour isn't working.
There is a lot of pressure in countries like mine to insist there is no child labour anymore in most sectors, certainly in export sectors. The idea is to say that these products are clean, they're not touched by hands of child labour.
Because if they're seen as connected with child labour, they won't get any money for them. They won't be able to sell them.
Exactly. We don't even acknowledge their presence.
So when the authorities come across child labourers, she says that instead of helping them, they want them to disappear.
And here, if children are found working, the state response is come in white vans, put them in and take them away to childcare homes where they're locked up. The children are away from their families, and the state calls the family and tells them the child should never ever be seen like this again.
And when they're released, most of the children go back to work because the problems that drove them to work in the first place haven't been solved. And this is where Kavita Ratner's organisation comes in. They meet child labourers in their villages and ask them, not their parents, why they work. Some talked about the hot meal they get at the factory. Some said they didn't get the support they needed at school. Others said they had to look after their younger siblings or fetch water. All of them had different reasons. But they had one thing in common.
They were not willing to transfer their burden onto the family. For instance, if they were fetching water, they were not okay with saying, let your mother fetch water and you be in school, because they were saying my mother has a lot to do already.
They had to find solutions that wouldn't put more pressure on their parents. And so Kavita Ratner's charity turned to what's known as the Panchayats, India's local councils.
And a lot of the work of my organization has been to work with these local governments, with children sitting with them. And the solutions in one case can be a scholarship for a child who has no money.
It could be more funding for childcare, so children don't have to look after their younger siblings.
In another case, a wheelchair for another child. In another case, it can be getting electricity for households which don't have it. And that is how we were able to create child labour-free communities in a country like India.
And by labour-free, she doesn't mean these are communities where no children work. What she means is that the work they're doing no longer interferes with school. Like Jo Boyden, she says some work can be a good thing. It gives children useful skills and money for textbooks or school uniform. It's all about making sure they can choose the right kind of work. And to do that, they create children's councils.
I'll give you an example. The villages we work with, we talk to children and we actually come out with a document called Work We Can and Cannot Do. For instance, milking the cows. Most of us might think it's okay, harmless, etc. But these kids said, if you're milking what are called Jersey cows, which are very temperamental and which are very happy kicking, they said nobody should be doing it because it's harmful work, it's dangerous.
Instead of lists drawn up by international organisations or central governments, they find out what the children want. Some might be exhausted by hours of household chores and prefer to spend 2 hours working for a local shop. Others might choose factory work over milking a temperamental Jersey cow. It's down to them, and it gives them a lot of control over their own lives. But can you really expect children to make the right decision for themselves?
I'm yet to find a child who willingly wants to be exploited.
But a child who perhaps continues to work because they feel the pressure to help their family.
We have to give the child that choice. In fact, this kind of work actually increases our responsibility. When we are working with children directly, you don't let them take that one decision and then forget them. You're still in touch with them. You're part of their life.
They're now working with children's councils throughout Bangalore. It's time-consuming and expensive, but it's having results. So, is it time to rethink the ban on child labour? The ILO, the organisation behind the global ban, says no. Children under a certain age should never work. But we've heard about the unintended consequences. Children pushed into more dangerous work or locked up by the authorities. It's a debate that will continue. But when you take a step back, it's clear that the argument isn't just about policy. It's about something more fundamental. For some, particularly in the West, a child under a certain age who works is, by definition, being exploited. Others say a child should have the right to work. And that's what makes it so hard to know what's right. The answer doesn't lie in our definition of child labour. It's about how we view childhood. This inquiry was presented by me, Helena Merriman, and produced by Beth Sagar-Fenton. And if you want to listen to more episodes, download our podcast. Search for BBC The Inquiry.
Distribution of the BBC World Service in the U.S. is made possible by American Public Media, producer and distributor of award-winning public radio content, with support from Baird, a financial partner guiding families, businesses, communities, and institutions since 1919. rwbaird.com has more information.
And good afternoon. You're listening to your local public radio station, member-supported Red River Radio. I'm Chuck Smith. Hope you're having a wonderful day today. It is pretty sunny outside, and probably going to get up in the upper 80s, close to 90. Probably another warm day, and be careful because I've noticed that the mosquitoes are out and about in the afternoon. I guess all that rain we've had recently has really gotten those insects thriving, and that's something our Dr. Beverly Burden could address if she were here. But right now we're going to talk more about pledging and pledge drive. And if you're a longtime listener of public radio, you understand that it is commercial-free. You appreciate being able to tune into programs like the BBC World News here on Red River Radio, or maybe it's in the morning, All Things Considered, All Things Considered in the afternoon, morning edition in the morning, or perhaps it's our musical performances. Whatever reason you tune into Red River Radio, understand that it is a public broadcasting service, commercial-free. 65% of our funding comes from listeners, just like you. Another 20% comes from businesses who underwrite our programs because they want to support public radio as a community service, plus they appreciate the quality audience that we attract. 15% of our funding comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, but it has to be validated through means of showing our listener support. It's not a gimme at all. So here's where you can really help out. Call in and make a contribution, $10, $20, $50 or more. 800-552-8502. That's the number to call. A big shout out to McAllister's Deli for providing lunch to our staff and volunteers today. Just another example of a local business supporting their public broadcasting station, and we appreciate it. In the studio with me right now is Alex Micabreja. Did I say it closer?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm getting better.
I think you're improving.
I'm improving. Alex is from the other Georgia.
The real one.
The real one.
That's right.
And he teaches history here at LSUS. And talking a little bit, before we go, you have someone you need to say thank you to.
Oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do. This is a dear friend, and a colleague, Dr. Cheryl White, and she has mentioned this the other day, that me and Cheryl have an ongoing feud, so to speak. She's an excellent British historian, and my specialty is French history and Napoleonic era, and so whenever she hosts the pledge, I call in and ask her to say something good about Napoleon. Well, now she responded in kind, and she made a very generous pledge, but she also specified that I must say this. My sincere apologies for August 1st and 3rd of 1798 at the Battle of Nile. And that's a great battle that unfortunately French lost, and it is a great triumph for the British, led by the Nelson. So thank you, Cheryl, for both reminding me about this painful moment, but also for making a very generous pledge. And I call on other of my friends to call in and remind me of other, maybe more fortunate events in French history.
Yeah, okay. Well, we need to hear from our Francophiles out
That's
there.
right.
And we need to hear from more of you guys. So give us a call at 800-552-8502. Make a contribution in support of your local public broadcasting station. So, Alex, you also, in your role here, you are the one of the curators at the Noel Memorial Library. Is that correct?
At the Noel Collection, I'm the curator, and it is, as I mentioned, the largest collection of antiquarian books, private collections in North America. It's actually might be one of the largest in the world, which is, again, for a town, a city the size of Shreveport, it's an amazing resource to have. It's a collection that has almost 250,000 books covering the last 500 years of human endeavor. We have books from 15th century forward. Some of the things that we have are the only items in all of United States.
Really?
And so what I do as a curator is I want to bring scholars to come and give some speeches and talks about interesting topics. And one of the first event we'll have on November 5. It's an event that I'm organizing with the help and together with Dr. Cheryl White, and it is we're bringing a famous British archaeologist, Richard Buckley, the man who a few years back discovered the tomb of Richard III. Right, it's a world. It was covered all across the world, and Richard Buckley will be here, and he will give a wonderful talk about both British, English history of the 15th century, but also about his quest to find Richard III's tomb, which I remind listeners was discovered under a parking lot.
Under a parking lot, yeah. I think I remember from my studies, what is it, now is the winter of discontent made into spring by this son of York. And, of course, the famous, a horse, my kingdom for a horse.
Absolutely.
And dude, I wonder if people know what the was on the coat of arms of Richard III. This is something our Arkansas folks should know.
Well,
that's
they
a
should
hint.
call in, pledge, and remind us.
Yes, that's a hint. We'll let you know what that is in a little bit. If you know, let us know. But I certainly do. But and I'm sure you do too. So anyway, but the number to call is 800-552-8502. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think about Red River Radio. Maybe some suggestions we could consider in our programming lineup. Again, 800-552-8502. We're going to be giving away a Louisiana Boardwalk gift card, $300 value on Friday. So if you call in and make a pledge right now, your name will be entered into that drawing. We also have a lot of other drawings going on throughout the week as well. We're going to get back into the BBC World News, but as we do, remember, this program's made possible because of the generosity of listeners just like you who value their local public radio station and its programming and become members by making a financial contribution. How about you? Give us a call at 800-552-8502. Thanks for listening, and thank you for your support.
They're breaking and forming in that time. It's a time full of instability.
Well, here are some students at York University in the north of England who do seem to know what it's like to feel lonely.
I was really excited to go to university because it's something that I've wanted to do for ages, but I feel like I built it up too much in my head, and I was sort of like, not quite disappointed when I got here, but like, I think Freshers Week is really oversold. It's like, this will be the best week of your life, you'll meet all your friends, and I was a bit sort of underwhelmed by it all. I wish I'd pushed myself out there more. To me, I think loneliness is sort of feeling like you want to be able to talk to people more, but not knowing how. Like, I have lots of, like, sort of superficial, like, acquaintancey friendships, but I don't think I've got many people I can really talk to about the stuff that matters.
More than anything, for me, it's about feeling isolated and not feeling like you're a part of the community that you're in. and feeling a bit ostracised, if you like.
On the weekends I struggle. Friends aren't around as much. I do, like Sundays, because it's a family day as well, so I definitely struggle on Sundays when I haven't got much going on.
There have been moments where I felt lonely, but it's never been prolonged, and I have a very good relationship with parents, and I do have some friends I know I can talk to, so I do know that there's people I can reach out to if I was feeling a particular way.
Manuela, I noticed the last student there mentioned that it doesn't always last for long, so maybe it's a very normal thing to feel at that age and can often be temporary.
Yes, so that's another reason that I think we are seeing such high levels of loneliness in younger people, is that when they experience it, they don't realize necessarily that this is something that can often be temporary. They also they haven't rehearsed different ways of coping with it and what works and what doesn't, which in itself might make it last longer. So the whole intensity of the experience is higher because, of course, you don't know you can get out of it or how to get out of it. So yeah, that's very recognizable.
Is it possible that older people might feel lonely in the same numbers but feel they can't admit to it or don't want to say in the study that they feel lonely?
It's very possible, of course, because there is indeed a perceived stigma associated with loneliness, and by that I mean that people have the idea that if you admit to loneliness, then you will be seen as somehow weak or inadequate. And we did ask about that, and we did find that that was stronger among older people. So it's very possible that it's not entirely clear why that's not the case as much in younger people, of course, but was the case. What's also interesting to think about is that we did try to delve into that stigma and try to see, well, are people who admit to being lonely really negatively evaluated or seen as weak or inadequate? And we actually found no evidence for that. So our participants, our 55,000 participants, were generally very kind about other people who feel lonely and very positive about them, wanting to reach out and help. So it is a perceived stigma, but not so much a stigma that actually exists. And I think that's interesting to speak about so that people realize it actually isn't as bad as they think.
And of course, it's not a competition between the ages. And if you do feel lonely, then of course it hurts, whatever age you are. Now, some older people, such as 96-year-old Jack King, are isolated because they're no longer so mobile. I went to meet him in the town where he lives on the south coast of England.
Really nice to meet you.
Likewise. I have some souvenirs here.
Oh yes, let's have a look.
My days as a prisoner of war. That is a rock that's made a hole in my forehead. I was hit from blasting.
Wow, that's a pretty big piece of rock. That's like, you know...
It knocked me off my feet. It
pretty
made
heavy.
a hole
It's
in
like
my
a
forehead.
kind of tennis ball.
I was wounded in the last hours of fighting on Singapore.
Now, there's no doubt that Jack is someone who's resourceful. During his 3 years as a prisoner of war during World War II, he put on plays for the other prisoners, fashioning stage curtains out of rice sacks. He also knew how to rustle up a lizard pie when food was scarce. But after the war, his busy life has been dominated by one relationship, with his wife, Audrey.
I met my wife on Eastbourne Station. We met in May and were married in September.
Wow, that was quick.
We were married for 65 years.
Wow.
She passed away 8 years ago this year.
And was that when you started to feel lonely, missing her?
Oh, yes. I didn't go out much afterwards because it's too nostalgic. I mean, everywhere we used to drive together, she was no longer there. You know the old saying about trouble shared and trouble halved, and happiness shared is happiness doubled. It's so true. It's so true.
For Jack, the days are long. His 3 sons do phone a lot, and someone comes in for 2 hours a day to help out. But this still leaves many long hours when he'd like to have company. So he looks for distractions, like composing music on the organ, painting and writing books.
So you write poetry as well, and you've written a poem called Loneliness.
I talk loneliness. I talk to myself because I listen to me. I talk to myself when I'm lonely. So I talk to the chairs and the hallway and stairs and the mirror that hangs on the wall. But it's no good at all, for I look in and see there is no one but me. I talk to myself in the dark of the night, when there's nobody near to hear and take fright. Through days' crawling hours of sunshine and showers, I converse with the window and door, the ceiling, the carpeted floor. I talk to myself when I'm lonely. I'm all by myself on life's dusty old shelf, just me and my own company.
You talk about the night there, but is there a particular time of day or evening that's worse?
No, provided I've got something to do.
So we asked you to keep a diary for us for a day.
Yes.
And I'm going to get you to read that diary now.
Oh, thank you. It is 6:30. The sun has not yet cleared the eastern horizon, and the day begins. The houses are silent as if sleeping in the silver light. A few long, thin clouds lie low in the eastern sky. I am moved by the beauty of the morning and wish there was someone here to share it with me. But I am alone, and I feel lonely. Bedtime arrives, and through the window I look at the moon, and so to an empty bed, which is very lonely.
Thank you for doing that.
Looked.
How typical would you say is that of all your days?
My day.
Very typical.
Yeah.
And what do you think loneliness feels like?
Feels like an ache, like a deep, deep ache.
We've been asking everyone we're interviewing what they think the opposite of loneliness is.
Yes.
What would you say? Everybody says
happiness.
Happiness.
But the opposite of loneliness is happiness.
Jack King. You're listening to Health Check from the BBC with me, Claudia Hammond. Today we're discussing the results of our study, the BBC Loneliness Experiment. And Professor Manuela Barreto, one of the team who's been analysing the data, is with me. Now, with Jack, the issue seems to be spending so much time on his own. But I was interested to see that in the study, not everyone thinks that loneliness is about being on your own, do they?
No. We had a third of participants believing that loneliness is about being on your own, but all the rest associated it with very different things.
And I was surprised to see that 41% of the people who responded told us they think that loneliness can sometimes be positive. That seems surprising when it's such an unpleasant feeling.
Yes, so loneliness is a little bit like a social thirst, let's say. So when you're very, very thirsty, it's not pleasant, of course, but it's there for a reason. It's there to tell you you need to drink, your body is aching for that drink, and you do it and it's gone. Loneliness is a little bit like that in the sense that, yes, it is painful, and it has to be painful so that you pay attention to what's happening and what's lacking. But as long as you respond to it by redirecting your attention to others and to your social connections, it should go away and it should be fine. So it's not necessarily negative, and in fact it can sometimes be positive because it leads to an anticipation of social connection, for example. But of course, where it goes wrong is where either you don't pay attention to those signs or you can't, because, for example, like Jack, as we heard just now, you have no sufficient mobility, no sufficient resources to actually be able to connect to others.
Now, this was a global study and people from all over the world chose to take part. Did you find that people everywhere experienced loneliness?
Well, the short answer is yes. We did find loneliness in every country and in every age group all over the world. In terms of age, we can also say that the age trend that we spoke about earlier was the same in every country. The only minor differences was that in some countries the slope was steeper, so there was a bigger reduction in loneliness across the lifespan than in others, but the trend is always there. But we also found that culture can make a difference.
Now, there were 9 countries where we had enough people taking part to make some comparisons, and levels of loneliness were almost the same in the UK, the US, France and India. I was interested to see slightly lower levels in New Zealand. Now, this isn't a representative sample, of course, but I wanted to know whether this made any sense to Dr. Matthijs Lucassen from the Open University, who hails from New Zealand and studies mental health in young people.
This isn't the first time that this has been highlighted. Statistics New Zealand talked about the proportion of people that were experiencing loneliness all of the time or most of the time, and it was around 2% in the New Zealand population based on the New Zealand Quality of Life survey, and that compares to a previous survey from the UK where it was about 6% of people. So it's interesting that the research now is reinforcing this pattern again.
And why do you think that there might be slightly lower levels of loneliness in New Zealand? Because they're not saying there isn't any, it's just that the levels are a bit lower.
I have a few theories. One might be around the composition of the cultures. In New Zealand, about a third of people come from more collectivist cultures, in particular Māori cultures. That's the indigenous population in New Zealand. And I think that it's the positive influence, perhaps, of the collectivist cultures on the majority New Zealand European culture in terms of connection and the importance of working together and supporting each other. Another is maybe around the proportion of one-person households. New Zealand has slightly lower rates of that than the UK. Maybe it's also to do with activities that are done in groups, such as sports participation, which New Zealand's doing well in, and maybe it's the climate. Most of the population will be in the upper North Island, which means that they don't really have extremes in temperatures. So there's going to be warmish summers and mild winters, and most people are close to the coast. So there could be some sort of relationship around being out and about, engaging with the beach and spending time outdoors, which is more difficult in countries when there are going to be quite harsh winters, or where there are really hot summers, or periods where it's difficult to be outside because of extremes in the temperature. And that might explain the connections that people can create more easily.
So it would be quite interesting to do a study looking, perhaps comparing the North and South Island of New Zealand, because of course in the North Island you can grow oranges and lemons, and you know the climate's much warmer than it is in the South Island. So it'd be interesting to see if there was a difference when it came to loneliness.
Yeah, and also in terms of rural communities. But then I think that rural communities in Britain and elsewhere in the world will also have the perception as the greater connections and closeness with neighbours.
In the research, when we've looked at people living in generally independent cultures where people are more reliant on themselves and proud of being reliant on themselves, compared with the interdependent cultures that are more collectivist, where people rely more on family and friends, one of the things we've found is that people in the independent cultures value their romantic relationships more. They make more of a difference to whether they feel lonely or not than they do in the interdependent cultures, where people may have family and a wider family to rely on as well, and not this just one person that we might do. I was wondering what you would see in New Zealand there. What would you? How is the Maori culture collectivist?
The Maori culture is collectivist in terms of how it would be structured, in terms of iwi, which is a tribe, the biggest social group, right down to whānau, which is the extended family units. And people will have their connections obviously with their wider family, but also with their iwi, with their tribe, also with the place. So even if they were living in a large urban centre such as Auckland, and their tribal homeland isn't based in Auckland, they have a place that they often will be able to go to, which has special significance. It's the place of their ancestors where they can then connect with others, and it's the activities that people will do on a marae, the central focus often of a tribal area, and what they can do in terms of supporting each other. It's this collectivist views and supports that are so valuable. And I wonder whether or not the positivity that comes with Māori culture has benefited New Zealand European culture as well. And there's also the cultures of the Pacific nations that very much have a positive influence in New Zealand.
So do you think there are lessons here for other countries? Could you deliberately decide to do some of these sorts of things? Maybe things like sports participation you could?
Yeah, sports participation could be a way in which things could be improved. I don't know about the climate, because that's sort of, we're not going to be able to adjust that. But if there's opportunities to be outside, interacting with others, connecting with others, that can make a real difference.
Matthijs Lucassen. So Manuela, one of the things we talked about there was this idea of independent versus interdependent cultures and the impact that might have on loneliness. And I know this is something you've looked at in the data. You can probably explain a bit better than I did what independent and what interdependent cultures mean.
Yes, so there's many different ways of speaking about cultures, and it's important to acknowledge that this is really just one way, but it is one that makes sense when talking about social relationships and loneliness. So independent cultures are cultures that encourage a definition of yourself as autonomous, self-reliant, and separate from others, and examples would be Northern Europe and North America. Interdependent cultures are the very opposite, so cultures where you're encouraged to see yourself as part of a community and a part of a family, for example. example. And that would be typical of Southern Europe and South America, for example. So this determines not just how you see yourself, but also how you relate to others, how you expect to relate to others and with whom, and also the structure and resilience of social networks. So in independent cultures, social networks tend to be broader, so they are wider, they're more extensive, but they are also somewhat less dense, so people don't necessarily know each other within those networks, and they tend to be chosen. So people in those networks are people you've chosen to relate to. Now that's great in many ways, but it also makes them somewhat vulnerable to transition. So if you're moving away, then you're not investing in those connections as much, and they might fall off. Whereas in interdependent cultures, those social connections tend to be denser, so they are smaller, they contain fewer people, but they tend to know each other, so they are dense and connected in multiple ways, which makes them more resilient to times of change or times in which you withdraw slightly for a while. And that's, of course, the typical example would be family, but not only.
So what did you find in different regions of the world when you grouped them together according to culture when it comes to loneliness?
So first of all, we found a lot of similarity, and that's important to acknowledge. So as we spoke earlier already, age trends, for example, were very similar across the world. There's some nuance in the detail, of course, but we also found some bigger differences, and the biggest difference is really that there was more reported loneliness in more independent cultures like the UK or North America, than in interdependent cultures, and that was especially the case among women. So women in interdependent cultures was particularly privileged in terms of not feeling as lonely, and men in independent cultures were particularly vulnerable.
Well, one example of a place where many people do rely on each other is Italy. Cosimo Sanitate went to meet Lydia in Bari in the south of the country.
Well, after my husband died, it really hit me. I felt lonely, yes, but I was very lucky to have my family around me in this difficult moment. And with two small kids, my father was also the father for my kids. And I felt I was lucky. I had my kids because they helped me moving on.
What about now that your children are grown up?
I go out, I have my friends to go out with, to do the passeggiata, we go dancing sometimes. We can't do nothing and just sit around. I also go to the dancing school during winter time to get me moving a bit. We don't go all the time, once a month, and we go and let ourselves loose.
Could this constant closeness with relatives feel heavy sometimes?
I don't feel a burden for them, and they're not a burden for me. With my sisters, I go and have lunch with them when they're alone. Here in the south, it's usual, even more during festivities, that we ask people, "Are you alone?" "Yes." "Okay, so let's meet and have lunch together." Food is a big bonding for people.
Personally, in my case, I've never felt lonely because I am young. I've always been surrounded by my friends, family. I don't even know what it means being lonely. I feel like I always lived in a very strong and united family. I think the family is the base of everything.
Lydia and her friend Jenny. Now, before we go, I wanted to talk about what people can do about loneliness. We asked people to tell us the solutions that had helped them cope with it.
I bake quite a lot to deal with stress. I've started saying to people that I'm always open to have a cup of tea with them, regardless of whether I know them or not. I'm saying, if I don't know you, let's have a cup of tea to get to know each other. Or if I do know you, let's just have a cup of tea and know that I'm there for you if you want to speak to me. So I think that's really positive in order to sort of tackle isolation.
I definitely keep myself busy, and I appreciate again that that's not for everyone, but that's just the way that I've coped with things. Even my friends say now, they're like, "Do you even sleep at night? Because you seem to be constantly doing stuff." And that's the way I cope with loneliness, and I love being surrounded by people and I love being part of things, and that's the way I keep myself busy.
Everybody can do something. Even if they can't draw well, they could draw or draw painting watercolour. And then you look at it and you're either delighted with it or disgusted with it.
It's interesting that the solution you've suggested is to do something that really distracts you like that, because 55,000 people from around the world have told us what they think about loneliness. And the number one solution that people suggested was to distract themselves by getting very involved in hobbies or pastimes or work. And that's exactly what you said.
Yes, that is the answer.
So Manuela, in the study, Jack's answer of distracting yourself was the one that came out top, but what else was in the top 5?
So first of all, the distraction is a really interesting concept, because you can also think of it as simply, enjoying being by yourself, engaging with things by yourself. But of course, some people will see that as a distraction if they're feeling bad, for example. The second one was about joining social groups or clubs, and of course, it won't work for everyone, and it won't work if you've joined a group that is, for example, not accessible and you have a disability. So the group itself needs to be one that is inclusive. The third one was about thinking positively, breaking with negative thought cycles, which is, of course, really a problem when you are already feeling quite lonely for quite some time. So there are techniques, psychological techniques for this to help people get out of those cycles. The fourth was about starting a conversation with anyone. Small moments of social interaction can become big moments, of course. And I really like the example of the person you spoke to, who spoke about, asking people for a cup of tea. That's a really nice way of preparing to have those little moments, because you do need to know what you're going to say. But it's also a good example of how cultural this can be and how much it needs to work for you. Because, it's funny, but in a British culture, of course, people want to have tea. That's a big thing, and
yes,
that's
tea
a
is
very
great.
positive
We
thing.
love as much tea as possible.
Yeah, but where I come from, only people who are ill will have tea, so that's not the best opening of a conversation.
And then number 5 was talk to friends and family about your feelings.
Exactly.
Which is an interesting one, because we found there that the people who said that they had higher levels of loneliness were less likely to suggest that one, suggesting it might be difficult. That won't work for everyone.
Of course it's true, and it's also true that to use the word loneliness when saying that might be the most difficult bit. So it is also about finding ways of talking about it that don't necessarily say I'm lonely. It can simply be about, I really would like to see people more often, or, can we go for that cup of tea every Sunday instead of doing it so sporadically. So it is about finding the way to do it, but it is a very important one to do.
Now, if you want to hear more about the top solutions in depth and to try to work out which ones might work best for you, do download our new podcast series, How You Can Feel Less Lonely. We've put a link to it on the Health Check website. Now, Manuela, I know there's a lot of data still for you to analyse, but what is the main takeaway for you that comes out of the BBC Loneliness Experiment so far?
I think one of the things is that is this whole divergence between people's perceiving that there is a stigma and being quite ashamed about feeling lonely, but actually the fact that we don't find one. We do not find negative views of loneliness, and that, I think, is an eye-opener, and it's something that we can actually stress more to liberate people from that pressure of there being a potential stigma about it. So that's something I will want to pursue more.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Manuela Barreto, and thanks for all of your hard work on this data too. The producer was Paula McGrath. I'll be back with more from the world of global health in Health Check from the BBC at the same time next week, when we'll hear why it's not a good idea to wear contact lenses in the shower. My name's Claudia Hammond. Bye for now.
And good afternoon. You're listening to your local public radio station, member-supported Red River Radio. I'm Chuck Smith. Hope you're having a wonderful Thursday. It's a beautiful day outside, partly cloudy. No real chance of rain in the forecast, at least from what I can tell. It's expected to be around 90 degrees today, so it will be warm with a bit of a high humidity level. In the studio with me is Professor Alex Mikabrija. He's the teacher here. He teaches European history and is also a curator with the Noel Memorials. Is it Special Collections?
It's Noel Collection.
Noel Collections, okay. And we were talking about different things about history, and you're an expert in Napoleonic history, is that correct?
That's right, yes. Almost all my life, at least the conscious part. I've been dealing with him.
Yeah, and what's one thing that people don't? What would you tell about people about Napoleon that they may not realize?
That he was not short. Let's start there.
Okay.
Usually we imagine him as a short man, or the famous or infamous Napoleon complex, which is not true. He was actually of average height. Of course, he would have been short by modern standards. He was 5'6". But it was average height back then, so 5'6" is not that bad.
Maybe it's because we see all those paintings of him with his troops with the tall hats.
True, and yes, partly that, and partly was the British propaganda, which was very successful.
Of course,
in portraying him as a short man.
It's interesting, how public opinion, and I guess that was their fake news about him back then.
And absolutely, in fact, in the Noel collection we have a wonderful collection of those fake news posters, because the Napoleonic era is a golden age of political caricatures of the late 18th, 19th century, and British were really great at that. So people like Cruikshank or Gilray produced remarkable pieces of this political fakery, so to speak, that portrayed Napoleon as this rather negative light.
That's amazing. Well, and you're going to have some special presentations coming up in November. It's not Napoleonic, but more of British history or English history. Right?
The first one, indeed, on November 5, will be the British history about the discovery of Richard III's tomb, right? Richard III from the great Shakespearean, right, archetypal villain. But we'll have also the second event on the 19th of November, which will be for centennial of World War I. We will commemorate it with a special symposium. We'll have speakers, some of the leading historians, American historians of World War I. Michael Nyberg and Edward Langell will come give talks, but we also will have a wonderful performance by our own LaWanda Blakeney, who will perform music written during World War I. So I think it will be an exciting event, and most crucially, both of these events on November 5 and November 19 are free of charge, so it's open and available to public.
Where would people go if they wanted to find out more information? Is there a website or any place?
Yes, they can go to either our Facebook, Noel Collection Facebook page, or James Noel Collection website.
Okay, good to know. And those are coming up in November, the first and middle part of November. So that sounds like a fantastic event to learn a little history. And I'm sure, whenever I go to something like that, I always walk away, learning something that I didn't know before. And people think of Richard III, and of course, they think of the Shakespearean play,
exactly.
But he was a pretty complex character.
Absolutely.
And, very, very unique for his times. And he also, if I understood my history correctly, he had a deformity.
Absolutely, and the skeleton that Richard Buckley and his colleagues discovered under the parking lot shows very clearly that very deformed spine. The curvature of the spine was such extreme that when I show it to students, usually you'll have this gasp.
Yeah.
And yet this man was able to sit on a horse, wear armor, and fight day long, and be a king.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
He overcame a lot of personal challenges there, and you kind of in some ways feel a little sorry for him, and but as a leader, he there's that other side too. But
absolutely,
like I say, a very complex character, and We'll remind people where they can find out that information, but we have someone that we need to take a moment and acknowledge for calling in and making a contribution.
Indeed, I'm quite thrilled to have two rather generous pledges. The first one is from Angela Varnado from Longview, Texas. And Ms. Varnado says that she finds the bug lady interesting. This is a reference to my esteemed colleague, Beverly Vernon. And Ms. Varnado says also that I wish you had Democracy Now! We just moved here, so I'm thankful for all the NPR can get. My 13-year-old boy likes BBC News.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. And we have a second pledge from Daryl Lawyer. From Nakatoches, or Natchitoches.
Is it Natchitoches or Nacogdoches?
Let's see here. Not Natchitoches.
That's Natchitoches.
There you go. I'm still practicing. Right? It will take a while.
Listen, I sometimes say it too, so that's okay.
And Daryl likes classical music and BBC News, which is my favorite as well. And actually, again, I call upon all the listeners to call in and pledge, because we have this remarkable. A remarkable resource here to receive so much information, essentially that will be otherwise unavailable. And I usually listen to the NPR news and on the way to school. And this was a couple of years ago. My oldest son is just 6 years old, and we are driving to school, and we were listening to the news as always. And we listened to this broadcast about discovery of a new species of dinosaurs that the discoverers, led by Steve Broussard, rather one of the leading paleontologists today, they called him Temur Lenge. Or called it. And so my son, being the son of a historian, right, he gets a lot of good night stories that are history based. And so he quickly recognized that this was a dinosaur named after the infamous conqueror, Timur Lenk. And he got really upset about it. So he peppered me with questions about why would somebody call a species of dinosaurs after this bloodthirsty conqueror. In fact, he got so mad that when he went back home, he wrote a letter that we actually sent to NPR. And we received a response from Broussard himself explaining why they named the dinosaur after Timur Lenk. None of this would have happened if we didn't have this wonderful resource where kids 6, 7 years old would have just listened and being exposed to this.
That is fascinating story,
absolutely.
you know,
So,
and you know, you're underscoring something that people don't realize is, you know, kids, no matter what age, but especially younger kids, they really do listen.
Exactly.
They really do listen, and if you've got, you know, a child at home, and you've got something like, I mean, if you've got, you know, cartoons on. Oh, I mean, that's one form of entertainment or something. But if you have something from public broadcasting or national public radio on,
even if it's in the background, right? They do listen to it.
do.
Absolutely.
Well, you know, on another note, when I was a child, I was 6 years old, living in Turkey. My father was stationed at an Air Force base near Izmir, and there was nothing there. We didn't have television, and there was nothing on the base. There was a movie theater, but my mother was Roman Catholic, and on Saturdays that was the only day that they would show kids films, and I had to go to catechism on Saturday, so I rarely got to see any films for kids. Yeah. I'd sneak out of catechism, but I'd always get caught. I had the BBC World Service on the Grundig shortwave radio that my father had, and I would listen to some gentleman named Nigel. You know, and he had this voice. This is Nigel so and so from the BBC. You know, and I'd listen to him, and he'd read news. And back in those days, there was talk about, you know, the strife in Pakistan, you know, and revolts and flood. You know, and I had no understanding of the political dynamics, but I was listening to those stories, and I remember those stories, and. Of course, I'm involved in radio today, I think, as a result of that. But I do remember hearing things that, you know, piqued my curiosity. And I would ask my dad questions. He was a news junkie. And, you know, here's a 6-year-old kid asking him, you know, well, what is going on with the Pakistan army and stuff? And he would, how do you know about that? you know, and it just, you know, it would surprise him and my mother too, you know. So I remember that. And you're right, children listen. They really do. So if you have something quality in the background or in front of them, you are really helping them develop a curiosity and an interest in the world, not just what's happening in their own cities and towns, but worldwide. And I think that's important too. But before we get back into our program, you pointed out your son. You got me curious about why they named them. We'll talk later about that. But I want to say, first of all, thank you for participating today and helping us out. It really means a lot to have, you know, persons such as yourself come in and spend part of your day talking about your experience.
It's an honor. It's truly an honor, and just be excited to be here and help it. I've been in Shreveport for 12 years, and for 12 years I've been listening to NPR and pledging and supporting however I could, and now just to be here, it's a wonderful experience. So, and I hope we'll raise enough funds today to keep this pledge going.
Well, thank you, Professor Mika Bridza from LSUS here, teaches European history, and we'll I think you stick around a little while longer.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, good. We'll talk more in a bit. But how about you? Give us a call, won't you, and support your local public radio station with a pledge. The number to do that is 800-552-8502. We are at $21,350. Let's try to reach $25,000 before the end of business today, and with your help, I think we can do it. You know, there was an old, I think it's an old Russian fable that has been contemporized a lot, but there was a book or a story called The Legend of Stone Soup.
Yes.
You know,
yeah.
And it was about, you know, I think 3 soldiers who were coming to a town. They were hungry, but there was nothing to eat, and so they said, well, I'm going to tell you how to make stone soup. And it began with a pot and began with a stone. But then everybody started saying, well, I've got some carrots over here. That might go well with it. I've got some potatoes. And everyone from the village brought what little they had, and they all ate well that night. And that sort of, you know, ties into public radio. You may not You know, you may not be a person who can write a check with several zeros, but you might be able someone who can call in and say, I've got $10. And if we get 10 more people calling in with $10 and 10 more people calling with another $10, well, I guess the point is many hands make light work. And just like in the Legend of Stone Soup, you don't realize how far your resources can go. If you pool together, many great things can happen if we work together. And so thank you for your listening. Thank you for your support. Please give us a call now, won't you?
There's a bit of a distinction. In the case of the two suspects accused of the Salisbury poisoning, they appear to have used aliases. They're extremely difficult, but not impossible, to find. As for the ones who've been named in The Hague, the 4 men accused there of the cyber attack in the Netherlands, they appear to have been using their real names. And there is an awful lot of information now beginning to emerge from open source information about their identity, their addresses, and even I've just seen one person, a colleague journalist, suggesting that one of them is actually a player in his own amateur football league. So these appear to be people who are easier to find.
Let's get the view now from Washington. We're joined by our State Department correspondent, Barbara Flett-Usher. Barbara, we had the UK, the Netherlands and the US laying it on the line today. So what are the accusations against Russia outlined at the Department of Justice?
They focused primarily on the hacking of sports bodies, especially anti-doping agencies, and talked about the scale of it. They said it was the World Anti-Doping Agency, the US and Canadian bodies, as well as more than 30 other anti-doping or sporting federations, including FIFA. And the focus was to hack athletes' data from these organizations and spread it throughout the web, thereby trying to cast doubt on on whether they had used drugs, basically trying to smear them and saying they were cheating as well, and the goal being to sort of muddy the waters with these organizations who had concluded that it was Russia who was cheating. The other thing they mentioned, the other plot they mentioned was targeting a nuclear power company in Pennsylvania called Westinghouse. Not a huge amount of information about that. They said that the hackers had created a fake Westinghouse internet domain and sent spear phishing emails to the employees to steal their accounts and credentials. There wasn't an explanation of whether they had been successful in what they were trying to do or why they tried to do that, although the Department of Justice officials did note that this nuclear power company sold nuclear fuel to Ukraine.
And some of the agents mentioned today already have indictments against them, don't they?
Yes, that was interesting. The DOJ officials said that one of the names under which these hackers were operating was Fancy Bear. Now, that is the same group of Russian-backed hackers that was the focus of an investigation by the special counsel Robert Mueller, who's looking into the hacking activities which were designed to influence the 2016 presidential election. And under that investigation, he had charged 3 of the 7 Russian military officers who were also indicted today. So there was overlap, although the justice officials said these were 2 separate cases. They did not involve Mueller's office.
Thanks for the update. Our State Department correspondent there, Barbara Flett-Usher. You're listening to the newsroom on the BBC World Service. Sue has the headlines.
American officials have indicted several Russian agents as part of a coordinated international response to suspected cyber attacks. And Democratic senators in the United States have dismissed as incomplete an FBI report into allegations of sexual misconduct against President Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh.
Now, after days of delays, more international aid has been arriving on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, nearly a week after the devastating earthquake and tsunami. The authorities have dismissed concerns they're about to end their rescue efforts, saying the search for survivors will continue for another week. Officially, only 100 people are still missing, but as our Southeast Asia correspondent Jonathan Head has been finding out, the true figure is probably much higher.
As daylight faded, the lights suddenly went on across Palu, a welcome restoration of power for the city, where other services, smashed by last week's earthquake and tsunami, are also steadily improving. Queues for petrol are more orderly, and looting is no longer tolerated. The police have warned they'll open fire on anyone caught stealing. Military transport aircraft carrying aid are arriving with greater frequency. In 2 days' time, the first large ships filled with basic commodities will also dock in Palu. But there's still frustration over the government's patchy response to this disaster. People like this woman, berating officials over the lack of aid up to now, feel that they've been abandoned. This delegation of farmers from a village wiped out by a mudslide told me they can't get government help without documents they no longer have. There's a lot more heavy machinery now too, clearing the crushed buildings, and followed always by the orange-suited search and rescue teams, ready to retrieve the bodies you can often smell before they're found. The official figure for missing people is a little over 100, but they've only just started collecting names from relatives. The complete obliteration of some communities buried large parts of their population. Many of those victims may never be found.
Jonathan Head. Now, over the last few hours, US senators have been reading an FBI report into allegations of sexual misconduct by President Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh, one by one. And the reason they are reading it one at a time is that there is only one copy between 100 senators. It's the FBI report. It's been compiled over the last week following dramatic testimony by Mr. Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford, the woman who accuses him of sexually assaulting her when they were teenagers. And Democratic senators aren't happy. Dianne Feinstein is the senior Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee.
The most notable part of this report is what's not in it. As we noted by the White House, the FBI did not interview Brett Kavanaugh, nor did the FBI interview Dr. Blasey Ford. What we've heard from numerous people over the last few days seeking to provide information to the FBI. We have seen even more press reports of witnesses who wanted to speak with the FBI but were not interviewed.
But the Republican Majority Leader in the Senate, Senator Mitch McConnell, said the FBI check found no evidence to prove any of the allegations.
The fact is that these allegations have not been corroborated. None of the allegations have been corroborated by the 7th FBI investigation. Not in the new FBI investigation, not anywhere. So none of these last-minute allegations have been corroborated.
Well, I'm joined now from Washington by our correspondent Gary O'Donoghue. Not surprising there, Gary. One side saying it's a complete exoneration, the other side saying it's hardly an investigation. Let's start with the Democrats then. What have they been saying?
Yeah, you'd hardly think they've been looking at the same document, wouldn't you? But they have. And the Democrats really, their criticism is on a much wider scale. They're effectively saying that the inquiry wasn't properly done, wasn't properly scoped and conducted by the FBI. The FBI interviewed 9 people. Democrats wanted a couple of dozen spoken to at least. There are a whole bunch of people at Yale when he was a student there that weren't interviewed. They're complaining about that as well. They're also hinting slightly that there is something in the document that hints at misconduct, although because they can't reveal its contents, they can't be very explicit. Well, they can't be explicit about that at all. But the Republicans saying this, as you heard, they're not cooperating. It's all steam ahead. And I think from Mitch McConnell's point of view, he's probably feeling pretty happy because there's been some indication from 2 of the swing votes on the Republican side that they are reasonably happy too.
So is that it now? Is it all done and dusted ahead of the nomination, which is coming this weekend?
I'm probably a fool to say so, but I think it probably is. I think that the worst is over. The lance has been, the boil has been lanced from the Republicans' point of view. There's a procedural vote that will take place tomorrow. That will give us a very clear indication about how the votes are splitting. Then there has to be this weird period of time where they 30 hours where they debate it, and then we should get a sort of final vote on Saturday. But I think if the indications are as they seem, then the leadership will feel and the White House will feel that they're probably going to get their man by Saturday night.
Gary O'Donoghue joining us from Washington. Thank you for the update. Now, the BBC has learned that a second British woman has died after undergoing the popular cosmetic surgery, the Brazilian butt lift. It comes after a 29-year-old woman from the UK died back in August after a similar operation in a different clinic abroad. The procedure has become increasingly popular. This woman was admitted to hospital after the operation known as BBL in Turkey.
A few days after I woke up with really high fevers, didn't tell any of the nurses. I just wanted to go home and just get to the UK doctors. I got admitted to hospital for 5 days and ended up on IV antibiotics. Luckily, one of them worked for me. For the first few days, nothing was working. My infection was getting worse and worse and worse. And I know other girls where the antibiotics didn't even work for them, so they ended up with really bad infection wounds all over the buttocks area and the thighs and everywhere.
Well, our correspondent Chichi Izundu told me more about the British women who have died.
So in August of this year, 29-year-old Leah Cambridge died after having BBL surgery at a clinic in Turkey. We now know that a second woman has died. She was in her late 20s. That's all I can really tell you at this point in time. We also know that an inquest into her death will be happening within the next year. Now, as a result of that information, and also because of the amount of inquiries that consultants have been getting in the UK, the British Association of Aesthetic Plastic Surgeons have now issued a warning against women going for Brazilian butt lift surgery, and they're also trying to get all of their members to no longer perform a Brazilian butt lift surgery in the UK. So while
additions and corrections to it. So Mahler playing Mahler here. Gustav Mahler at the piano, performing his own music, the first movement of his Fifth Symphony, the Funeral March movement. He performed there on a piano roll, which was made in 1905. Now, this was originally the second movement of the First Symphony. It's probably the earliest surviving orchestral movement by Mahler. He excised it from the symphony and called it Blumine, which refers to flowers. We're going to hear that now with Karl Anton Rickenbacher and the Bamberg Symphony. Karl Anton Rickenbacher and the Bamberg Symphony with Blumina, originally the second movement of Mahler's First Symphony, excised and made as a work standing on its own.
Good afternoon. You're listening to your local public radio station, member-supported Red River Radio. I hope you're having a good afternoon. We are in our fall pledge drive, and so far we are at $21,350. We're trying to reach $25,000 before 5 o'clock, and that means we need to get some phones ringing. So if you would take a moment or two and give us a call at 1-800-552-8502 and pledge your support to your local public radio station. I'm Chuck Smith. I'm normally on in the early morning hours for Morning Edition, Morning Edition local newscasts. And of course, if you're an early riser as I am, you like to tune into Red River Radio and catch up on all the latest national and international and local news. And we are pleased to bring you that program, and because of your support we're able to do that. And right now we are in our music program for our mid-afternoon break, and we do want to remind you that whatever time you tune in to Red River Radio, these programs, while they are commercial free, they are not free programs. We have to pay for these programs, and the way we are able to do that and offer a commercial free service is because of you, the listener, who calls in and makes a contribution. So give us a call, won't you, at 800-552-8502. That's the number to give us a ring, and if you'd rather, you can go online to redriverradio.org and click on the red button at the top that says donate and fill out the form. Professor Alex Mikabrige, I'm getting close. Mikabrige.
Very good.
Very good.
By the end of the hour, you'll have it.
And well, you say your students call you what?
Dr. M.
Dr. M.
Yeah.
Dr. M. It almost sounds like a rapper's name.
Or villainous, like a James Bond villain. Kind of. By the end of the semester, they will probably consider me such.
You can say something like, that was very foolish, Mr. Bond.
Yeah.
Yes. Or Dr. Evil. Or Dr. $1 million. No. Well, speaking of $1 million, that's about what it takes to run Red River Radio throughout the year. It costs $108 an hour to keep us on the air, and that pays for our programming, our lights, our staff, and everything else that we need to bring you the service that we do. And we were talking about history a minute ago, and you were talking about how your child had overheard something on a broadcast about a discovered dinosaur and its name and all that. And that's something that I like to point out to people about public radio, is that we have a variety of programs. It's not just news, it's not just music, a lot of educational stuff as well, that I like to think of it as a higher quality type of broadcast, and not just something that passes the time and makes noise in the background.
Absolutely. And, again, even if you are listening to it, the kids are in the background and also just trying to catch up. And we have a wonderful selection of classical music. In fact, I can say that we, because the kids were listening to this classical music so much on the way to school and then back, that now we just got